For everyone for coming. I'm Sachin Bhakar. I work for an energy company. And I'm going to talk about a not so interesting topic. It's more about governance, how to come up with policies, how to come with processes, how fragile or agile they should be, and from there, where they should take the inspiration. A standard disclaimer, most of the opinions that I'm sharing here are personal and does not represent views of my company. Today is Holi in India, so happy Holi, everyone. That's just a picture I took last year. This year, I'm not playing Holi. But anyway, happy Holi, everyone. Okay, so what do I mean when I say open source security by design? It means implementing structures that have been validated, implementing processes that have been validated by a big group, has come into an existence, make the process so structural that the chances of failing, or I would say shipping something which is not so secure are less. It does not eliminate, it just reduces and mitigate. So what happens is that whenever a new standard is created, organizations can just implement it and come up with new policies and processes. So it can be said that the standards are the missing piece that every company should implement because they have been thoroughly tested for a wide application for a specific subject. And a company can tailor the standard as per their appetite, as per their market, if they are into B2B, into B2C, how they are deploying their project. Based on those characteristics, a company can trim down the standard. They do not need to adhere or conform to the entire standard. Of course, that would lead to lack in terms of that they won't be able to say that they are conforming to a certain standard because they have met guidelines that meet their appetite. So that's where I'll be talking about. I'll be talking about two standards that have been published by OpenChain. They help any company who's consuming or leveraging open source to reduce risk in terms of security and in terms of compliance. Once a standard is achieved, it will reduce certain activities and efforts that are recurring because there will be a systematic flow around it. The releases will be faster and there will be more consistency because everything is measured, everything is defined, and everything is supposed to be executed in a certain way. So yeah, this slides talk about the broader vision. Why standards? Why there is a need to have standards, why there is a need to have policies, and why processes. So first I'll start with the standards because that's where every company should start with, but it does not always work in this way. There are certain times when a company will be having a policy and process in place, and they will adhere to the standard at a later point of time after doing a gap assessment. So what I mean by that is that if a company is consuming open source repositories or open source code, and they don't know how to do the compliance part or how to do the security part, they can have certain goals or certain objectives of their own that any repository which is being included, the license will be studied and will be complied with. Same goes for security. Whenever a component or a library is introduced for a product, it needs to, the risk should be measured and it should be under the defined risk appetite of the security policy. So for standards, it will be more of, let's say, produced by a body which is primarily focused to create standards, and it is made publicly available for everyone. And then the tech companies or any other company can implement those and can come up with a policy. So standards, they come into existence via a thorough discussion and research. The technical community will give up their guidance to the management board. The management board will send it to the council. And this is more of like a rough structure, which is followed by ISO. Other standard companies or other standard organizations can follow a different structure. So yeah, policies are based on risk appetite and goals. So if a company who is more, let's say, into cloud deployment, their risk appetite when it comes to open source security or open source compliance is relatively less as to a company which is actually supplying the entire code base to the end customer. And processes are, I would say, is the most flexible bit. A single company can have different processes to implement the policy that has been deployed over the broader organization. Processes, I believe, in terms of effort, takes the maximum amount of time or efforts because it's more of like an iterative process. It's flexible. It keeps evolving. A standard is more of, let's say, an annual exercise, uh, or even more than that. Policies are revised somewhere between 6 months to 2 years, but processes can evolve monthly, quarterly, weekly, depending upon the requirement. But out of all the three, processes are the most, I would say, agile and iterative document. So, okay, I've talked about policies, I've talked about standards, and this may sound confusing to some people who are not really excited about the governance part because governance is the mandatory act that no one wants to do, but it is enforced by the government, it is enforced by the legislation. There are certain ISO standards which are enforced by governments that one should follow. For now, I believe in software, there have been certain standards which have been enforced by CISA, that in what format the SBOM should be supplied. So, and I would say in the software industry, the implementation of standards, introduction of standards will increase with time. So how to reduce or how to make it, how to simplify it? So this is an open standard for security assurance published by OpenChain. Now, as you can see, there are different control mechanisms that are listed. To someone who is going through this particular security standard, it may be complicated, and that's where I've somewhat simplified. So the key requirements that you see, just a second. The key requirements that you see here are the requirements that can help you to achieve OpenChain security assurance program, but these are the bare minimum, so where you can help or you can reduce your company's security risk exposure, but it will not eliminate it. And at the same time, until you achieve all the 24 controls, you cannot say that you're OpenChain conformant. So yeah, the key requirement around a little more deep dive into OpenChain assurance program. So this is more of like a deep dive done by a focused entity that how a company or how an organization can reduce their exposure when it's come to security. And it is around certain principles is that the code should be scanned every now and then whenever it is supplied. One major part which I've forgot to share is that this is only applicable for the software that is supplied. It is primarily focused on supplied software, which means the software that has been distributed to the end user. If it is consumed within the company, then this particular standard is not applicable. Of course, user or development team can still apply it, but it will not generate the output that it's supposed to. There are 24 controls that have been listed in the OpenChain assurance document. Once a company or an organization achieve those, they can call them as conformant. But if they really don't want to go through all the 24 and they believe the resources are not well utilized, they can actually tailor it down to the last 5, which is to document the entire process, that how any library or how any product will be deployed. There should be a structure around it about the team members or program participants. So program participants are people who are more of like driving the open assurance program. It can be equivalent to OSPO. Though for those who are not familiar, OSPO is open source program office in any company which helps the company to leverage, contribute back to, and let open source thrive within the company. And then there are certain requirements to assess, identify the vulnerabilities, mitigate those. If the vulnerabilities are not mitigated, then communicate to the end user that there are certain vulnerabilities which were not eliminated. And the assurance program also states that the user needs to identify a risk score for every vulnerability, and they should have a clear defined guidelines that under what risk score they will mitigate it and what risk scores are not mitigated, and they are just used and no action is taken on them. If a company is able to implement these requirements, it will reduce the risk exposure significantly. The next one on the slide is open chain compliance. So compliance is more around, I would say, around licenses. Security assurance program was more under the scope of CVs. So for any product where open source libraries or open source code is consumed, it can come under certain vulnerabilities, and it will also come, it will be shared via license. So license will define the entire open chain compliance program. So just like with the previous slide, I have somehow captured the key requirements that are required for to comply with the open chain compliance policy. So every organization must have an open source policy. The open source policy will be comprehensive enough to capture all the requirements, such as what would be the structure of the team that is reviewing the compliance process when it comes to open source code, who will be leading the effort, how licenses will be categorized, whether there is a requirement of whitelisting or blacklisting a license, and in what cases when a product has been shipped and a non-compliance occurs, how they will be resolved and how they will mitigate it. Based on these, a compliance program can be structured. And the last and most important criteria, which most of the companies overlook, is to have a publicly available contact. So let's assume you have shipped a product and the product is under non-compliance and some user has been able to detect it. One of the key requirements to reduce the infringement risk is to comply as soon as possible. A publicly available contact will help the company to be aware about the non-compliance and to act on as soon as possible. So yeah, these are the impact of standards. I'm rushing into the slides, but we can open up at the end of the session for any questions. So it will reduce the risk, be it security, be it compliance. It will improve the efficiency of R&D. The research and development department, it will streamline the process. So instead of every team doing a scan, there will be one scan and the reports will be shared with different teams, and they will just review the specific section that they have to, and instead of entirely going through all the sections. And this is the impact that ISO standard has with any, I would say, in the company, that it can lead to an increase in revenue anywhere between 0.5 to 5% of the total business. So it is worth the effort to invest in standards, in policies. Yep. That's pretty much about the presentation. If there are any questions, I can take, or else we can wrap up the session earlier.
That was much quicker than I had anticipated. Thank you. Yeah, standards and policies are my life, so this is interesting to me. Questions? Is anyone dealing with building information security management systems and therefore having to select standards and devise policies? Okay, one other person in the room. Questions, comments? In that case, I have a question. You referred to two ISO standards there.
Yes.
The 18974 and the 5320, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know if you explained it. What are those two standards about, and how are they different?
One is about security, how to improve and reduce this security exposure. It will be around identifying the known vulnerabilities, the CV, for every vulnerability that is there out there. And the other standard is more about compliance. So whenever I would say, you're talking about strong copyleft licenses, AGPL, GPL, how to handle those, how to mitigate if they are captured in it.
Oh, I see. The license issue, for example. Yes.
So it was more about a very brief, just about the security exposure and how to reduce it, and the compliance infringement risk and how to reduce it.
It sometimes seems ridiculous, but the work to build those standards is a long, complicated debate.
Yes.
To sort of tease out the essence of what it is that people keep forgetting, and for exactly the reason that you raise. You avoid redundancy, you avoid blind spots. It's like, okay, at least get that stuff done.
Yes.
We had one of IBM's CTOs speak some years ago about an internal program to make use of NPM, so for JavaScript stuff inside. And for IBM, NPM is horrifying. It's like, what do you mean we've got coders, not just for internal systems, but for customer products? So this was Notes and their chatter thing, I forget what it's called. So building a shipping product. And IBM's lawyers are like, are you kidding? This is not possible. And so the obvious solution to the problem was to implement an internal NPM registry, which would bring in whatever developers needed, and actually had license scrutiny and code scrutiny, a team doing this for every release of every package that came into their internal registry, and it was exactly those two things. Is this stuff vulnerable, and are we complying with the marked licenses?
Yeah.
So I'm interested that it's the same two questions.
It is kind of the same work, but most of it has been now automated. So the system will tell you that, okay, these are the libraries that have been consumed, and recently, like, vulnerability has been reported about a certain library, and you can fix it. So I mean, most of the companies are still following the same function, but it's less, I would say, manual and more automated.
Oh yeah, it was, I think, 7 years ago.
Yeah.
A great deal has improved in the meantime, but it's just intrigued that it's the same two functions have now become candidates for ISO. But that's amazing.
Okay.
Here we go.
From your last comment, I find the world a little bit differently as far as things improving recently as opposed to in the past. I mean, the standards activity is very important, but my question is really, in your experience, we're in a time right now where between the various supply chain security vulnerabilities that we have, be it malicious attackers, lots of research going on, lots of CVEs in this supply chain. Identifying those components is important, and identifying where those vulnerabilities are. In your experience with your company or others that you've worked with, how hard is it to actually find those components that have those vulnerabilities and actually remove them from your product? We have one issue where you have, first level dependencies that are brought in. You can identify the CVEs for those, upgrade those. Those are easier. But when you have secondary, tertiary projects where that's where the CVE is identified, but the component you're bringing in hasn't done their update, how are you finding the effort to engage in those upstream communities to fix that version? Or are you creating local forks to do the backport yourself, and then now you've got a local fork to deal with, and you're off the chain? What's your process to actually make that better as you're trying to improve this and be compliant? Because beyond being compliant with OpenChain and knowing where your vulnerabilities are is actually fixing them and keeping up to date with the freshness of your components. Any thoughts on how that's going, again, either in your current organization or others that you've talked to?
So usually I ask teams to follow one thumb rule, is that whatever is being supplied, be sure that all the vulnerabilities that are reported should be mitigated. So if, let's say, if there are libraries that are consumed like interior within the four walls of the company, or I would say it's not exposed to the outside environment, those should be fixed. It's a no-brainer. But I would say when we go to the multi-level dependencies, maybe second level, third level, it becomes difficult sometimes. But so does the risk. So I would always say that the first level dependency carries a higher risk as compared to which is like a fourth level dependency, because the code involvement will reduces as we further reduces the dependency. And again, the thumb rule. So if it is not being supplied, the risk is somewhat less as compared to something that is being exposed to the external world. So that's something that I convey to most of the teams. And then again, it's more about efforts. If a company can throw 100 resources, they can go down to the fourth level dependency. But if company has 5 resources, they really have to just balance it with the limited number of resources they have. It's always like difficult to do 100% compliance or 100% risk removal. Some risk will always be there. Some non-compliance will always be there.
I get the concern. You're thinking about stuff like the OpenSSL case where it's 4 or 5 layers down, but it turns out that it's catastrophic.
No, and actually the concern is, well, one is the Cyber Resiliency Act and other federal regulations that are like that, where you can't be running and you can't be shipping code that has a known exploitable vulnerability. And that's an extremely hard statement to actually comply with, particularly. Well, and that's just and that's just just take the simple case of it's a publicly identified CVE, so then it's known, right? And so that's the minimum bar. And you're right, it could get more interesting, but the minimum bar is there, and that's a really, given the interdependence of all of the components that we have across the open source ecosystem and how everything calls everything else. Any given end application often has multiple versions of the same component libraries because their dependencies are all calling in different versions down that dependency tree. And they all have vulnerabilities. I mean, I see this as a really big problem to try to fix in the next 2 years as the CRA and other regulations come into effect.
Certainly, I was slow to grasp the importance of the work that was being done in software bill of materials. It's like, okay, it's a lot of interesting and somewhat appealing sort of paperwork and metadata, but of course, once you start to notice, oh, my transitive closure is 6,000 packages in up to 15 versions in some cases. And so then you're dealing with an entirely different category of problem to what we thought we were. So yeah, it's an interesting area, and but I do take your point. The stuff that's close to the surface is usually a bigger risk, but I suspect that over time that we're going to get pressure to get much, much better
Absolutely.
at SBOM.
Yes.
So,
Yep.
all right, we can probably do one more. Michelle is on in about 4 minutes. So anything else? Aha. Okay.
So I get that you're mostly talking about policies, but like in your experience, how is the tooling in this space, and like do you feel that to do this compliance work and security posture work, do you think the tools that are existing today automate this work enough? Because of course there's a lot of scale in this and a lot of dependency involved. So what do you think are the challenges in this space to automate all of this work so people can access and do it more easily?
So tooling is still evolving in this space. At least I would say for the security aspect, it is more mature, but for compliance, it's still not that mature. For security, we can quantify the risk score, and on the basis of that risk score, we can either mitigate it or either we can just let it go without working on it. But for compliance, there are times when the license is not properly identified. Even if it is identified, there are multi-license, like it is multiple license. It can be dual license, tri-license. So in those cases, someone needs to manually intervene. Again, a system can be trained to pick the most permissive license out of all, but then again, there are times when the most permissive licenses also will not work with the project. So if I have to say for security, it is far, far, far mature, because whenever a new library is being introduced, the vulnerabilities are fetched up, but the same does not go with compliance. So that's why you'll see that for compliance, the process will be somewhat slower as compared to security. So I don't know if that answers your question, or I can stretch on. Okay.
All right, thank you. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Joe.